Israel's prime minister saying the top Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, has been killed in a military operation in Gaza. Israeli officials say that Sinwar's body was recovered with DNA tests confirming his identity. Sinwar is considered the chief architect behind the Hamas October 7th terror attack on Israel that left more than 1,000 people dead, and an attack which also triggered the war in Gaza, which health officials there say has killed more than 42,000 people. Sinwar took over leadership of the Palestinian militant group in August after the previous top commander, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated. Hamas has not yet commented on the fate of its leader. All right, for more now, I'm joined by our correspondent Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Tania, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just gave a statement on the death of Yahya Sinwar. What did he say?
Yeah, he had a couple of things to say. I mean, his statement just came after the Israeli military and the security agencies confirmed that after conducting these forensic tests on the body they retrieved from Gaza, that it was indeed Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who was killed in Gaza. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hamas will no longer rule Gaza. But what was interesting, he was not just addressing the Israeli public with something, that he has long sought after. I mean, Israel had been looking for Yahya Sinwar now for over a year. But he also addressed the Gazan population there in Gaza, saying this is the beginning of the day after Hamas, an opportunity for you, he said, to basically make sure that Hamas is no longer ruling the Gaza Strip. He also said something of the sort of saying whoever lays down his weapon and return our hostages, he will be allowed to leave and to live. And we also heard something similar actually from the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant then later on, that this would be maybe a possibility. He was also addressing the hostage families, that it's still most important for the government to bring back those hostages, although we have to say a lot of families and relatives have lost a lot of their trust in the government of doing so now, also that all of the focus had shifted to the north. But he also said at the end that the war is not over yet, so maybe also giving an indication that this doesn't mean that everything will change from now on.
And Tania, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he is a controversial figure. He's been criticized within Israel for how the war in Gaza is being carried out. What does Sinwar's death mean for Netanyahu?
Well, I think, for him, it's, of course, an achievement for him and his government, also for the military, although we have to say it is quite interesting to hear from a lot of these security officials now that this was not, such a targeted assassination as we used to see with other Hamas leaders, or even, in the past weeks, the targeted assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. It was something that the IDF described a routine operation, and that they had killed Yahya Sinwar. Of course, we still get more details if this was indeed the case. But I think for the government, first of all, it is a major achievement. It was always one of their key issues to go after the Hamas leadership, to go after Hamas, remove Hamas from power. But it doesn't mean, that this war that Israel is fighting is over. We don't have an indication that Israel would stop this war tomorrow and go for a ceasefire. And of course, there's so many questions now, because we have also seen, movements, what becomes to the north of Gaza, where we've seen a new ground operation there in the northern part of Gaza. We see that there's not enough humanitarian aid going in, according to the United Nations. There are also all these plans that are constantly coming up by the far right and also right-wing members of Netanyahu's government to resettle Gaza. So there are a lot of question marks as to the day after of Gaza that need to be addressed.
DW's Tania Krämer with the latest in Jerusalem on this breaking news story. Tania, thank you. All right, our coverage continues now. Let's go to Middle East security expert and the senior director of the Counter-Extremism Project, Jakob-Schindler. Mr. Schindler, it's good to see you. What does Sinwar's death mean for Hamas and for its capabilities in fighting Israel?
Well, I mean, this is really another significant blow, in particular for Hamas in Gaza. Dave died several months ago. Now Sinwar is gone. The Qassam Brigade command and control structure seems to be, according to Israel, mostly dismantled. The tunnel network is very weakened. So the capabilities of Hamas to resist in a coordinated manner, as well as the capability of Hamas to launch terror attacks from Gaza into Israel, is extremely weakened at the moment temporarily. Of course, no leader is absolutely irreplaceable. Sinwar will, of course, be replaced. There will be another Hamas leader in Gaza, but to replace Sinwar's long-term experience as the founder and head of the internal security structure, his experience with Israelis through his very long prison sentence, for which he actually was sentenced for killing Palestinians, not Israelis, is something that is really hard to replace. But it's a temporary opportunity to think about a different power structure in Gaza. But that's a decision that the Israeli government and military will have to do. The hint of Prime Minister Netanyahu that the population of Gaza should be shaking off the shackles of Hamas is quite strange, because Hamas has weapons, the civilian population doesn't.
Yeah. We heard from Israel this evening as well that no hostages were found near the body or the site there where Sinwar was killed. So what do you think? Does this make it more or less likely then that there will be a hostage release deal?
Well, I would say this is an opportunity for the Israeli government, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has done to a certain extent, to simply declare victory and then go over to a new phase of this conflict as far as Gaza is concerned. And part of that new phase is, of course, hostages. Now, there is still active Hamas structures in Gaza. That means these hostages will not simply walk out of the strip. But you can hopefully get a better deal, because the most painful deal that was definitely a possibility was that the last remaining hostages would have been released for liberty, or the ability for Sinwar to leave the Gaza Strip. That would have been a political disaster for the Israeli government. With his death, this is no longer a possibility. So you could restart these negotiations. The question is, who is your partner in the Gaza Strip at this point? Because all of the major leaders are dead.
But that's what I wanted to ask you. Who then do you think is going to take his place as the head of Hamas?
Well, as the head of the Hamas and the head of Hamas in Gaza is two different issues here. So as the head of Hamas, there is still a pretty fully staffed political office of Hamas outside the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Khaled Meshal, for example, a former Hamas leader, is still alive. The Israelis tried to kill him unsuccessfully in the 1990s. He could take over, others could take over. The bigger question is, who is going to be the new power broker of Hamas in Gaza? And how does he value these hostages? Are unfortunate, it sounds very brutal, is a negotiation chip. Whoever holds these hostages holds immense influence in Hamas itself, because these hostages are very clearly meant to bring home Palestinian prisoners, something that the Hamas leadership from outside the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is not going to be able to do. So these hostages are very valuable for Hamas. And so whoever is going to be the next leader will tread carefully to release them too soon.
Okay, Middle East security expert Hans Jakob-Schindler. Mr. Schindler, we appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I want to cross over now to Laura Blumenfeld, a Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. Laura, so the leader of Hamas is dead. What immediate impact do you think that Sinwar's death will have on the entire Middle East and the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, starting from Israel and looking out, I mean, today is the first day of Sukkot. It's their harvest holiday, and the Grim Reaper came for Sinwar. So it's highly symbolic that Israel's most wanted man has a rock-sized hole in his head. But for Israelis, your average Israeli, I would say his death means nothing, and the hostage lives means everything. So if we want to broaden out to a regional peace, I think we have, one word 3 times: hostages, hostages, hostages. which is why we need to become maybe more creative. And rather than going back to the same negotiating table with the same terms, which we haven't gotten far, in over just less than a year, there are other opportunities. Netanyahu talked about a reward, lay down your weapons, release your hostages, and you will live. I think that it's time for some creative thinking and intensive diplomacy.
We have been led to believe since this war began that there were some Israeli hostages always with Yahya Sinwar. The thinking is that that would prevent a direct attack to kill Sinwar. Israel confirmed today that there were no hostages found with Sinwar's body. So what does that tell us? Does that tell us that Israeli intelligence has not been as accurate as we thought? Or how do you read this?
Well, it's early, right? So there's a lot of details that will come to light. There is one report that the 6 hostages who were assassinated, who were shot point blank, including the American Hirsch, Paul, and Goldberg, were with Sinwar, that they found DNA evidence, and he was actually using them as human shields. So, what Israelis say, my intelligence sources say, is it's a very, very tricky moment now where you could have individual hostage holders, Hamas terrorists, gunmen, either just taking matters into their own hands and killing the hostages they hold, or fleeing and just releasing them. So that's why I think you see Netanyahu, the prime minister, kind of going over the head of Hamas leaders, appealing directly to the Gazan people. In the last Zogby public opinion poll, Hamas was polling at 7% among Gazans, Palestinians living in Gaza. They are not popular right now, and so he's trying to take advantage of that.
Does Sinwar's death, does it open up more opportunity to have a ceasefire deal in Gaza? That's one question. But also, does it open up the opportunity for Israel now to focus even more on Iran?
Right. So there are open accounts in Israel has several open accounts. I mean, the United States would like to pivot to a ceasefire deal, although there's still that kind of revenge, that's pending from Israel to retaliate against their October 1st. There were 200 ballistic missiles launched by Iran against Israel. So I think that based on how they have been working, again, my intelligence sources, I said, what is your strategy going forward? And he said, don't F with us. So I think what they're going to do is launch some kind of counterstrike against Iran, not so much to deliver that kind of final knockout blow, but to show them how much they have left to lose, which could potentially mean striking against centrifuge factories, missile factories, maybe a massive cyber attack. It's kind of almost like that, the Godfather movie where the guy wakes up with a horse head in his bed. It wasn't so much to kill him, it was to instill fear.
This appears to be a big victory for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Will it reconcile his critics? Because you know as well as I do that there have been some very loud critics of Netanyahu inside Israel.
Well, I think if he can deliver the hostages, that will redeem him. I mean, for those who say that he needs to go strong and hard militarily, I think he's winning that support. His defense minister, Gallant, was quoting the book of Leviticus today, chapter 26, and saying, we will pursue our enemies and bring them down with the sword. So for his right-wing critics, he's delivering. It's more for the folks who are looking to kind of end the fight and begin the rebuilding process that he's going to have to deliver for. And I see some opportunity now with the death of Sinwar. It also depends on who replaces Sinwar. There are certain Hamas leaders who are more aligned with Iran, which is not good news. But there are those who have more strong connections with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, and that's a real opportunity for the United States to press more leverage on them and get some kind of deal, whether it's the old terms or a whole new package.
Before we run out of time, I want to pick up again on what you said about how unpopular Hamas is inside the Gaza Strip. Do you think the death of Sinwar is this the moment that will allow the Palestinians in Gaza to rise up and demand that the forces leading them or not leading them be changed?
Well, I don't think they're going to be listening to Netanyahu's call. The question is there some leadership from within that talks about building rather than blowing up? And I think that, look, it's heartbreaking. It's hard to imagine, folks having a kind of positive outlook. I mean, Jake Sullivan on the anniversary of October 7th, our national security advisor, said it's hard to push past the hopelessness. But there are those who are willing to look toward the horizon, especially if Israel offers something politically for them to aim for. That's our hope as Americans.
Middle East analyst Laura Blumenfeld. Laura, it's always good to have you on the program. Good to get your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.